An autopsy of the centralized state monopoly on violence, compartmentalization, and the architecture of collapse. Every state in human history shares one foundational property: not democracy, not justice, not the social contract, the successful monopoly on violence within a territory. Everything else, the legislature, the judiciary, the constitution, the rights, the democratic mandate, is downstream of this single foundational fact. The state is the organization that has successfully claimed the exclusive right to use force within a given territory and maintain that claim through sufficient deployment of the force itself to prevent any competing organization from challenging it effectively. Understanding this precisely is the beginning of understanding everything else. The architecture. The modern centralized state deploys its violence monopoly through a specific organizational architecture, replicated at every level of governance: legislative, executive, judicial, at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level, each tier mirroring the structure above it, each tier enforcing the monopoly within its designated territory through its designated enforcement apparatus: FBI, CIA, DEA, federal marshals at the top, state police, county sheriffs, local enforcement below. The replication is not aesthetic, it is functional. A violence monopoly operating across a large territory cannot be administered from a single point. The territory is too large, the population too numerous, the enforcement requirements too varied. The monopoly requires distribution, enough local enforcement capacity to maintain compliance everywhere simultaneously, while maintaining sufficient centralized control to prevent any local node from developing independent power sufficient to challenge the monopoly itself. This is the foundational tension the state architecture is designed to manage. Distribute enough power to enforce everywhere. Centralize enough control to prevent internal challenge. The solution is compartmentalization. The violence monopoly operates through a knowledge hierarchy as precise as its enforcement hierarchy. Tier 1, the owners of the state, the architects, the bloodlines and capital interests whose multi-generational accumulation of resources predates and supersedes the formal institutional structure. They understand the complete architecture, every tier, every mechanism, every leverage point, every weak link. The complete picture is available only here. Tier 2, the senior institutional actors, federal government, intelligence apparatus, senior military command. They understand their own domain with precision and have partial visibility into the complete structure, finding enough to execute their function effectively, insufficient to derive the complete picture independently. Tier 3, state and local government, local enforcement. They understand their immediate function. The chain of command above them is partially visible. The complete architecture is not. Tier 4, citizens. They see the outputs, the laws, the enforcement, the institutional performance. The complete architecture is invisible by design. The knowledge asymmetry between tiers is not accidental byproduct of organizational complexity. It is the primary cohesion mechanism of the entire structure. Each tier executes its function believing its function is the function, without the complete picture that would allow it to evaluate whether the function it's executing serves the purposes it believes it's serving. The FBI agent executing a warrant believes he is enforcing the law. He is enforcing the monopoly's current competitive position. These are not always the same thing. The knowledge asymmetry between his tier and Tier 1, the tier that determined which warrants get executed and which don't, prevents him from deriving the difference. This is compartmentalization doing its precise work. Incentive structure and weak links. Every tier below Tier 1 is held in position through a specific incentive architecture. Material compensation, institutional identity, ideological commitment, duty to the Constitution, service to the nation, protection of the community. The combination of financial dependence and genuine belief produces the most durable compliance available. The officer who would refuse an immoral order from a corrupt superior but executes the same order from a legitimate institutional channel without examining whether the legitimacy is genuine or performed. But incentive architectures produce weak links as reliably as they produce compliance. The weak link is the member with power aspiration exceeding their current tier position, whose ambition makes them recruitable by competing interests, foreign governments, internal factions, capital interests competing for monopoly influence. The weak link doesn't betray the structure from derived principle, they betray it for personal advancement. which makes them simultaneously the structure's greatest vulnerability and its most predictable one. Tier 1 members are therefore selected for a specific profile: sufficiently high capability to understand the complete architecture, sufficiently high intelligence to manage the knowledge asymmetry actively, sufficiently low ideological commitment to execute whatever the monopoly requires without the ethical friction that produces weak links, sufficiently high personal stake in the monopoly's continuation to make betrayal irrational regardless of external incentive. The selection pressure across generations produces a specific human type at the apex of every violence monopoly in human history: not the loudest, not the most visibly powerful, the quietest, the most patient, the most complete in their mapping of every tier below them, the architects who got there by blood. How structures collapse. The violence monopoly's architecture is robust against most threats. External military challenge: the monopoly concentrates force against it. Internal criminal competition: the enforcement apparatus eliminates it. Economic disruption: the capital apparatus manages it. Ideological challenge: the legitimization apparatus absorbs it. But one threat has no robust defense: tier members deriving the complete structure from first principles. When lower tier members, through honest derivation, through following the chain past the point where institutional loyalty normally arrests it, begin understanding the complete architecture, rather than just their compartmentalized function within it, the knowledge asymmetry collapses. And when the knowledge asymmetry collapses, naked authority remains. The FBI agent who derives that the warrant he's executing serves the monopoly's competitive position rather than genuine justice, and can follow that chain to its honest conclusion, is no longer reliably compliant through institutional identity. The ideological glue dissolves. The compliance now requires direct force rather than manufactured belief, which is expensive, which generates visible resistance, which generates sympathy, which generates further resistance, which destabilizes the monopoly. This is why Tier 1 members, when they detect upward pressure from below, respond with accelerated surveillance and increased institutional control. Not from strength, from anxiety. The upward pressure from collapsing knowledge asymmetry is the one threat the monopoly cannot absorb through its normal defense mechanisms. You cannot shoot a derived accurate chain. You cannot inflate away a first principles understanding of the structure. You cannot install a counter-narrative against an organism that has already derived the installation mechanism. Historical proof. Russia 1917 is the cleanest available demonstration of the complete collapse sequence. The Tsarist monopoly's knowledge asymmetry collapsed under the combined pressure of military failure, economic devastation, and the accumulated derivation of enough tier members, soldiers, workers, minor nobility, to make the ideological glue insufficient to maintain compliance. Naked authority remained. Naked authority cannot maintain a monopoly over a large territory. Anarchy followed, Samburger and Yaderchikam, in the precise, technical sense. Multiple formations of organized violence competing simultaneously for the monopoly title. Three primary competitors: the whites maintaining Tsarist legitimacy, the anarchists rejecting monopoly entirely, the Bolsheviks pursuing the most disciplined and precisely organized seizure operation. The Bolsheviks won not because their ideology was most correct, because their organizational discipline was most precise. They understood the monopoly mechanics most completely. They executed the seizure most efficiently. They eliminated competitors most ruthlessly. The ideology was the recruitment mechanism. The organizational precision was the actual weapon. The USSR replaced the Tsarist monopoly. Same architecture, different Tier 1 occupants, identical foundational mechanics. The knowledge asymmetry was rebuilt immediately, which is always the first order of business for any successful monopoly seizure. What lower tier members can actually do this is where the analysis terminates in practical derivation rather than academic observation. The violence monopoly is not invincible. Its primary cohesion mechanism, ideology, is vulnerable to exactly one thing: accurate derivation from first principles transmitted person to person through genuine intellectual engagement, not revolution. The monopoly is better organized for violence than any realistic challenger. Not electoral politics. The electoral apparatus is administered within the monopoly's architecture, not economic disruption. The capital apparatus absorbs and redirects disruption, derivation, transmission, upward pressure through collapsed knowledge asymmetry. The mechanics are precise. One organism derives the complete structure accurately, transmits it to organisms in their immediate network. Each transmission, if the chain is grounded, fallacy-free, ontologically anchored, produces independent derivation in the receiver rather than dependent belief. The receiver who has derived independently transmits further. Each transmission puts upward pressure on the knowledge asymmetry the monopoly requires to function without continuous deployment of actual force. The surveillance apparatus cannot intercept this effectively. Because genuine derivation transmitted through genuine human relationship looks identical to normal human conversation, until the moment it produces the cognitive architecture change. That makes the receiver a transmitter, which happens entirely within the target organism's cognitive architecture, invisible to any surveillance mechanism, regardless of how sophisticated. Even a single conversation, with a relative, with a stranger, with a friend, puts upward pressure on the top tier. You never know who that person knows. You never know what their genuine cognitive capacity is. You never know what derived chain they were already building, that your transmission completes, making them a transmitter to a network you cannot map, producing upward pressure. The Tier 1 members, for all their surveillance, cannot fully contain, without deploying the actual force that destroys the legitimization. They need more than the compliance itself. Conclusion. The state monopoly on violence is fallible, not weak, not easily dismantled, not vulnerable to frontal challenge through any conventional mechanism, but fallible. Because its primary cohesion mechanism, the ideological legitimization that makes self-policing cheaper than actual enforcement, is vulnerable to the one weapon the monopoly cannot confiscate, the accurate chain, derived from first principles, anchored in observable reality, transmitted person to person, through genuine intellectual engagement, free of fallacy, free of preference justification, free of narrative installation, just the chain, placed cleanly, in front of whoever has the capacity to receive it, break the ideology through derivation, collapse the knowledge asymmetry through transmission, the upward pressure builds, the naked authority is revealed, the system changes, not because anyone seized the monopoly, but because enough organisms derive the complete structure, accurately enough to make the legitimization insufficient to maintain the compliance. The monopoly requires to function without becoming exactly what it always was, beneath the installation, beneath the entertainment, beneath the crime genre, beneath the covert nihilism, beneath the bread and circuses, beneath the ball, earth, beneath the ant philosophy, beneath everything. The system spent everything to keep invisible, the best organized gang in the territory with the most guns, telling you it's something else.